Well, here is the book I'm reading from tonight with the most excellent cover that I think I've probably ever seen in my life. It's a collection of short stories, like she just said. And the story that I'm going to read from is called Things You Say. It's the final story. And apologies in advance, I woke up with a cold, so I am going to do my best. A stranger comes to town, and it's me. It's me, making myself seen as I take up residence at this lake hotel. It's me, sitting on the patio near the tiki bar, sipping my cold brew in Kahlua, looking out on the picturesque lighthouse and the docks with boats and sea-doos under tarps. It's me, driving a pontoon out on Lake Panorama, looking at every house and waving to the people who watch behind curtains. It's me, counting on the gossip to heat and boil, for word to spread beyond the confines of this nowhere Iowa place, for people to hear that someone's bought all the rooms for the entire summer season and wonder, who would have that money? Who would need all that space? Who does she think she is? It's me. And here they come, other strangers seeking me across highways and through a collection of central Iowa small towns marked by stop signs and Casey's General Stores and Trump 2024 lawn placards. The first is a woman named Lisa. She walks through the hotel out to the patio bar where I sit. It's mid-morning, and the shadow of the building still protects me from the early summer sun. No pleasantries, no touching, not yet. You're June Cullen, she says. The need is bare on her face, the hope and fear of a dog in a shelter kennel, watching all the potential masters assess her. She's late 40s, like me, like all of them will be. She's got deep lines around her eyes, loose pale flesh on her arms, a shirt that hides her middle, like me. Is it true, what you can do? I open my mouth and she hears me. Her eyes change. She softens, rigid shoulders melting. And it's for us, the former riot girls? She nearly weeps when I nod. Finally, she says. Then she gets her story out in a burst, a last gasp of the old language. She holds out her hands, palms up. I stand up from my lounge chair and put my palms on hers. She expects something like a jolt, a burst of electricity between our skin, so she gasps and jerks her head back. Nothing like that has happened. That's not what happens when this thing is passed, but she expects it, so she creates it. She pulls her hand away, wipes them on her pants. Then she opens her mouth. How does it feel? It feels blind. A Bikini Kill song, Feels Blind. Not in Lisa's voice, though. The entire song, the exact notes and instruments and arrangement all coming from her. Lisa closes her mouth and her body shakes in laughter, or maybe tears. I had both. When I opened my mouth 6 weeks ago and heard Slater Kinney's Things You Say issue forth, not from my own voice, no, but the recorded song from the 1997 album, I cried. For a moment, it was a cry of joy, like I was an actual musician, able to turn emotion into sound. But then it was a cry of fright. The feeling of it, like ants crawling in my insides, wasps buzzing in my chest. They call viruses bugs, and maybe that's why. But it's not just one bug, it's 1,000, 1,000,000, a drone of wings and words we don't understand. And the fear of the unknown, yeah, that was scary. When I took to the internet to see if I was crazy, I saw local news reports and crime blotters, middle-aged women committed to hospitals and confined to drunk tanks, singing in strange, inhuman ways. They were women gone wild, mothers and wives snapping, weirdo leftists faking for attention, just like women do. But I saw what it could be. I recorded some tests. I posted them, signed them with girls to the front. In one, I used the terms we'd build around, sirens, sailors. Now I hand Lisa a room key, then gesture to the bar. My name is Lisa. I was 17 when I found a riot girl group in Kansas City. It was 1991. We met in a girl's basement where it smelled like a backed up sump pump and fruit roll-ups. I brought my twin sister, got us out of the house, which was always the goal. Our group talked about how everyone encouraged girls to be teachers and encouraged boys to be lawyers. We talked about how to get birth control and what we could carry as weapons. We talked about the senior that everyone knew had raped a few freshman girls and how those girls didn't say a word. We went to punk shows, linked arms. pushed forward past all the moshing boys, screamed girls to the front, just like Bikini Kill did. We made plans, volunteer at a women's shelter, fundraise for the food bank. That group saw me, saw the core of me and not the skin and shape. But as soon as we got started, the whole thing began collapsing. Our groups were all over the media, the things they said, the ridicule, the hysteria. We were just girls, but even our soft rebellion couldn't be born. So the group shattered, and it was just me and my sister again. My sailor is a man named Tom. By the end of the week, we have 6. The most recent one, Jen, she brought a printout of a post I did. She'd highlighted one section. The virus is a gift. Biology is finally catching up with our desires. This is so much more than us being a human record player. This is girls to the front in a very real way. We can be magicians without the hokum, heroes without capes. We will be sirens. She says she wants this, wants power. All of them do. So I give it to them. We lose the old speak, take on music as language. If I was a man, I'd be videotaping this process, laying my hands on each of these women and healing them with power. I'd wear bedazzled suits and snakeskin boots as I flailed about, speaking in what could only be called tongues. I'd use the videos to bilk thousands of their savings. Give me your money, give me your love, and you'll be saved too. Right about now, I'd also start laying the groundwork for the sex stuff, building a mythology around my healing hands and how they just must be kept strong and healthy by letting them roam free. And don't forget the doomsday prophecies. I'd be full of them. The world would be doomed to burn in fire by aliens or comets or nerve gas in a period of months or years. So it'd give us a ticking clock with plenty of time to buy our island and get our orgies in before slurping down that poison juice. But I'm a woman, so I get to work. We get to work. And I think I'll stop there. So Peter, come on in when you're ready.
Yay.
Yeah.
I love that story. It's such a great wrap up to the whole collection. One of the things I love about the collection is the way that you do move. I mean, that's sort of like a hardcore realist, story. And then you have a lot of like what I would classify as speculative fiction, even like into science fiction. And it really moves back and forth fluidly between these sort of genres. And I'm curious if you have a sense before you start writing a piece, which of those directions it might go in.
It's an excellent question that I don't know if I really know the answer to. I know that when I start a story, I'll start with an image, I'll start with even a phrase, and I don't like to plan much more than that. I like to just sort of see where it goes. And more often than not, it goes into the speculative vein. And that's probably because I love the ability of speculative fiction and sci-fi to be able to say all the weird stuff that, we may not be able to say in regular literary fiction, to be able to use that as analogy to talk about the things that are happening right now or happening in the past. And I see that as such a powerful way of going about a story. So more often than not, it kind of heads that way, increasingly lately as well, with political climate as it is.
Yeah. So do you, before you actually start writing, do you have much of the story worked out in your head, or is it really just like, let's see where this goes and start writing?
It's the latter, because when I first started writing, I think when we all first start writing and we know what we want to happen, but it's not really happening. I tried so hard to plan everything. And that's because in my life, I'm a planner. I need to like plot everything out and make checklists and all the things. So I figured that would work best for me with writing. But increasingly, anytime I did that much planning beforehand, it was almost like I was the taskmaster and I was rebelling against my own task mastering. I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do what was on the outline. Or I found that it was moving in different directions. And then I was like, well, now I have to redo the whole outline. I have to redo the whole plan. So I find that without that, and this is probably the only area in my life where I could say that, but without that, I like that ability to be sort of spontaneous and to just see where the story will go.
Yeah, I get that sense in reading them too, that there's, I mean, obviously there's the, that sense of discovery as the reader. Um, but yeah, it doesn't have that overly mapped out thing where you're like, okay, this is all very much pre-programmed. It sort of unfolds along with you. And I see over your shoulder a copy of an image from the Liz Phair album, Exile in
Mhm.
Guyville. So for those who don't know, that was really a landmark album from the 90s in general, certainly from Liz Phair's career, but it came out in 1993. And the title of the album is Exile in Guyville. So can you talk some about the connection between that album or maybe Liz Phair's work in general and your writing in this collection?
Yeah, I think that album in particular, it was sort of billed as like the feminist response to the Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street. And she's kind of been Liz Phair herself has been kind of back and forth on if that was actually what she intended or if that's, and all of that aside, I love the idea that she was taking on not only specific male bands and male musicians, but also the scene itself, and trying to make something very unique, trying to make it very almost confessional in a way that I don't think was very received well in rock music at the time. And I what's funny is there's so many different songs, so many different topics. Just that title, though, when I was creating the very first story in this, which is titled Exile in Guyville, and it's about a museum where women are put behind glass and they're captured from all over different times and brought to a future time to this museum. I was just thinking about, and in many ways, that story is about complicity and about women who are sort of selling out other women. And I just loved that idea that that's sort of Guyville. And that's kind of where we're at right now. That even though she wrote that in 1993, that it feels like this is more and more Guyville every day. And we're sort of exiled in that world. And so when I thought of that title, I thought, this is just perfect. This is it.
Yeah. And was that sort of like a given that you were going to use that title once you landed on it? Did you know, like, I'm gonna, because, okay, I mean, to state the obvious, it's unusual to have a title of a book be the exact same as the title of another book or even an album. So, did you have any sort of hesitations where you're like, nope, it's got to be that?
Um, I didn't have hesitations. I think in some ways because my first book is also short stories, and they're all named after songs, all the stories themselves. And then the book itself, I called "Dig Me Out," which, as you can see behind me, is a Slater Kinney album called "Dig Me Out." And in my mind, music to me is just as important as books, and I feel that they're connected in ways that I can't fully, explain very well. I can't fully understand very well, but I know that whenever I'm writing something, there's always a connection to a song that I'm thinking about. And somehow that song then informs the story in ways. Somehow it's interacting, sometimes it's contradicting the story. And I love that. I love that interplay between music and the stories themselves. The only hesitation I had was about, copyright and things like that, but we figured out it was fine.
Yeah. Give me 1 second. I just got to let my dog in the room. She's
Of
whining
course.
outside the door. She's driving me nuts. Hang on 1 second. So sorry. Come on. I apologize. Um, yeah, and for those who don't know, it's an interesting fact that you can't copyright a title. So in theory, we could call a book Moby Dick. We could call it, anything we want, which is really wild to me still. I have a hard time wrapping my head around that, but
Yeah.
it is perfectly legal.
Yeah, what a strange thing. But I guess, yeah, worked out well in our favor.
Yeah. And I see Lou Reed, I think from Transformer album, maybe on the back
Yes.
there too.
Yep.
Yeah, I love that
And
shot of him.
some Patti Smith. And then over here we got David Bowie, we got
Oh
Joan.
yeah. Uh-huh. So obviously, like punk comes through as influential on you and your writing in the book, like loud and clear, not just in the last story, which it obviously comes through loud and clear through that, but I think throughout the book. And I was trying to think of some elements of your writing that reminds me of that style of music. And one thing that I landed on was that the book for me, no matter what kind of story we're talking about or the style, the genre, even what happens like to gruesomely to people throughout the book at different points, it has an element of fun in it. And to me, I think, it's a fun collection. And again, it gets dark and stuff like that, but even when it's dark, it's still having fun,
Yeah.
which to me is a very punk thing. It's like it might be really edgy, it might be smacking you in the head, with a Doc Martin or whatever, but you're somehow having fun.
Yeah. I
Um,
love that because there were many times where I would write a certain line and I would just laugh to myself, like, this is the best. Like, no one else may have noticed this, but I think this is freaking hilarious. And it's the perfect addition to this. But I do think you're right in that um, in some ways, punk is about uh, mashing genres in a lot of ways. It's about, not letting rules or even, lack of training or anything like that stop you in trying to express yourself. I just really like that both DIY and sort of anarchic attitude when it comes to punk. And I think I try and channel that in my writing, definitely.
Yeah. And I would say yeah, it's interesting that you say that sort of like not polished, because I will say like your stuff is very polished. So that it's not ragged in that, in that way that can work really well with punk and having just three chords and that's it, and barely
Yeah.
being able to play those.
Yeah.
But so what is, I guess one question that just immediately comes to me is like, can you write listening to that music? Because I have a really hard time listening to anything that's too engaging.
Me too. I can't write to really any music with words in it. Because
Mm.
it just, yeah, it interferes. What I end up doing a lot is well, first off, from Nine Inch Nails, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, they have put together wonderful like instrumental albums and film scores. And it's
Mhm.
got such a great mood and it really channels that Nine Inch Nails energy. And that I listen to constantly when I'm writing because it really sort of gets me in that right place. But also other film scores too, just the way that they can mold emotion and mold like mood and everything. It's both sort of soothing and inspiring at the same time and lets me still listen to music.
Yeah, no, it's tricky though, and I agree. And in some ways, yeah, something with lyrics, if you, especially if you're a word person, you're a writer, it's like immediately you're going to pay attention to what they're
Yeah,
saying.
can't do
Is
it.
there a specific album of that collaboration that you would recommend?
Yeah, the Ghosts albums that all came from 2008. There's four albums that are just basically instrumental, but in the way that Nine Inch Nails is instrumental. And then just in 2020 they released two more. Beyond that though, some of their film scores are The Social Network and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and they just did
Mm.
Challengers actually. So a long, long catalog to dive into.
Yeah, oh, that's cool. That's great. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
What would you say is the biggest connections between your writing and punk? You heard my 2 cents on it, but what would you say?
To me, and there's a reason that I focus on the Riot Girls in the last story too, is that, I'm thinking a lot about punk of the early 90s, where the Riot Girl scene in particular, it was a lot of young women that were told, you can't play music. They didn't have the proficiency perhaps that they should have had to start bands, and they did it anyway. They took that, doubt, and they took that maybe fear and lack of confidence and channeled it into this explosive punk scene and music that they created. And I really like that idea of doing things even though you're afraid, and doing things and
Mm.
saying things that people don't want to hear, but saying them in a way that will still bring the boys to the shows and will still get fans 30 years later. And it's sort of like taking your medicine in sugar or in candy or something like that. I just really love that kind of punk in particular, and I think that's what influenced me here was not just the use of speculative fiction, but the use of music in that way, to
Mhm.
me, was a way to build in messages that, you know, are maybe tough to think about and to hear.
And I mean, I think we're from the same generation, I'm guessing, based on your influences. So just for those who don't know what Riot Girls are, can you just tell us what Riot Girl is?
Yes, and you'll have to shut me up after a little bit, but right.
It's really important for, I think, fully grasping your collection, though, because it's so out of that scene. It's
Yeah,
everything about it has that feel. So yeah, please.
definitely. And it's great timing too, because one of the pretty much founders of Riot Girl, Kathleen Hanna from Bikini Kill, she just put out a memoir and it just came out and I haven't read it yet. I'm super excited to read it, but it's great timing. She and a few other bands in around 1990, 1991 just started creating a scene in like Eugene, Oregon, which is a college town in Oregon, where they performed as bands, but more than that, they started creating zines and other uh, consciousness groups, things like that, bringing women together, bringing girls together to talk about sexual harassment, to talk about rape, to talk about abortion, to talk about birth control, to talk about homophobia, all the things that we may look back on the 90s with a certain gloss right now, but like no one was talking about that was really like on a national stage or in a way like that. And just the idea that not only were they performing, but like Kathleen Hanna herself would go on stage in like a crop top and marker slut across her stomach. So it was designed to be very provocative, designed to own the terms that had always been thrown at her, to own the experiences she'd had. So it was a music scene. It was sort of a consciousness raising scene. It became sort of a movement of young girls all across the country. And I was very much of the age, but unfortunately, I was not cool enough to really know of any local Riot Girl groups or anything like that. So it's very much like me looking back almost with like, oh, I wish I could have been, a little more connected. But it's unfortunately what happened is after a few years, it sort of imploded because media pressure became too much. It was the media constantly saying, these girls have no place saying such and such, these girls are just, it was very infantilizing. It was very demoralizing. It turned girls against each other, just like you see today, where it's like this band, the media will say, this band said this about you, and let's try and start a fight. So it was a very short-lived movement, but one that's been very powerful and I think still has an impact today. Obviously, it does on me.
Well, yeah, again, your book is such an offshoot of that, or some, clearly a part of that scene too, an extension of it. I was just flashed on Portlandia too, which I think is the TV equivalent of the extension of the Riot Girl scene in a lot of
Very
ways,
much
right?
so. And Carrie Brownstein herself. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, and it's interesting too because although we associate grunge with Seattle, I mean it was sort of a hand in hand with that whole scene, but that whole scene was so sort of male macho, and at the same time, like you say, we forget, but like Kurt Cobain going on to stage in like a baby doll dress, kind of as a goof was like a
Yes.
big deal then, which is silly because we'd already been through Lou Reed and we'd been through David Bowie and everything, but we'd also come out of the 80s hair bands and all that stuff, which again, were wearing more makeup and teasing their hair up
Yeah.
higher than anybody. But
Uh-huh.
that
Mhm.
aside, Kurt Cobain it wasn't looked at as ironic, it was looked at as a real statement. And it seems
Yes,
kind of simplistic and almost quaint now. Um,
it does.
but he
And
was
it
very much hand in hand with that movement as well and friends with the Riot Girls and so forth.
absolutely. And it's so great to know that Kurt Cobain was such a feminist. He was very much, he was a friend of Kathleen Hanna. Like those movements were
Mhm.
connected, but you're right. It became much more like these are the boys and they're the ones that have the future, and yeah.
Yeah, and again, that's what that's what the music industry took off with. Obviously, like Soundgarden and all these bands that
Yeah.
were very, very
Pearl
dude.
Jam, Nirvana, yep, all of them.
Yeah, was where did Courtney Love fit in with Riot Girl? Just out of
She
curiosity.
she did not really ally herself because unfortunately there was a rivalry with
Hmm.
her and Kathleen Hanna. They were not the best of friends. But at the same time, her album came out in 1994, Live Through This, which in and of itself is a fantastic, very sort of riot girl mood in my mind. It's very angry, it's very beautiful, it's all of those things. But I don't think she, name-wise allied herself with that. But timing was right.
Yeah, I don't know that she allied herself with anything or anyone in a lot
Very
of
true.
ways. So, so I mean, I don't think she was looking to be part of a movement
Very true.
other than the
Yeah.
Courtney Love movement, you know. One of the things that also struck me about the book is that, you know, every story in some ways, to me, it can be summed up on like pressures on women. And that might be, you know, economic, it might be social, it might be physical, but every story has some aspect of the pressure that women, you know, that society exerts on women, let's say, and then the reaction to it.
Yeah.
And particularly in the title story, in that case, it's also sort of women putting the pressure on other women.
Mhm.
And maybe you can explain a little bit more for everybody what I mean by that, as far as the lead character in that story, the pressure she exerts on other female
Yeah.
characters.
Yeah, in that main story, it's this museum is run by a curator, and the curator is a woman. And we learn that through time, we learn that the curator does not have pure motives for gathering all these women, that in fact there's, she's told a story that is not true to bring these women to the future, and then offers a choice. Like, do you want to just go along with it? Do you want to participate in this system? And that in particular, as I was writing the story, I was sort of surprised in the direction that I decided to take it. But I think at the time it was very much just as it is now. It's this idea that there are so many, I'm just going to say it, Republican women that are, allying with this horrible anti-women agenda in order to hang on to the tiny bit of power that they have and maybe expand that power a little bit. I really, I see that pattern in my family. I see that pattern with a lot of women. I'm in Iowa, and so right now we're under a Republican stranglehold. So we see a lot of our governor is one of those women. It's just sort of everywhere. And to me, that's such a, it feels almost worse than when Republican men are saying all the things that they're saying. And I think it's also interesting that you called up, or that you mentioned reaction to pressure, because I think that's what we're seeing right now is sort of a um, backlash to progress, but also a backlash to everything that's happened in the past. It feels like this constant pattern that we're seeing where progress, backlash, all that thing, and it just seems that that backlash feels more backlashy than
Mm.
the past, perhaps.
I'm just thinking of how different the book would be if we flipped the first and the last stories.
Whoa, yeah. Oh, interesting.
It's kind of disarming to start with that.
Yeah,
As a, I mean, so you know, the very last story is this, like, in a way it's got this satisfying like revenge element. You're just like, oh my god, yeah, give it to him, you know. And I, part of me wants to say, like, was it fun coming up with the different tortures? Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. Um, yeah, it was one thing I've sort of given myself permission over the years more and more is to let myself get weird and get dark and to really go, like, to just sort of explore all these places that maybe I'd been afraid to go before. And in writing that story, at first, as I was reading a little bit, this group of former riot girls come together and they use this power that we're not really sure how they got in order to entrap some of the men that have done them wrong in the past. And as I was writing it, at first I was sort of, I wasn't allowing that revenge or that, violence to come forth. And once I did, I was like, oh, I mean, this may be too much, but this feels right. This feels like what would happen. This feels like the pressure is pushing us towards this direction, which sucks. It's we're inflicting then the violence that has been inflicted upon us, but that's the pattern. That's what we keep repeating, and it's so frustrating that that's the way it is. But I wanted to show that in the story.
Yeah, and I think by the time we get there, we're ready for that though. And it is, there's a real, which I think is an amazing thing to be able to do in a book. Like, there's this catharsis as a reader to get to that last part and be like, yeah, you know, we're just gonna like tear this all to shreds. But it's interesting, if it had started that's collection that started with that story, I think it would
Yeah,
be a much bigger pill for people to swallow, and you might even lose readers who don't make it through the collection that far.
I think you're right. And choosing the order of stories is always difficult in a collection or in anything like this. And some of the stories in the middle, I think they could be swapped
Mhm.
around fairly
Yeah.
easily. But over time, I realized, no, I have to start with Exile first and talk about complicity and talk about like where we are in the world before we get to the point where I'm asking people to be okay with violence.
And Typical Girls also is a story, is really it's got this intersection of technology in this whole mix too, which obviously it's not programming itself, it's been programmed by humans to do what it does.
Mhm.
But can you talk a little bit about that story and how it fits into this whole scheme?
Yeah, and what's interesting is, so there's parts of this story. The overall story is we're in the near future. There's a woman that works as a hotel concierge, and there is a new life app that everyone is getting, and it's basically like a download into your brain where you have sort of a Siri type personality that is helping you through the day's, troubles and everything. But it's a souped up Siri because there's all sorts of things that happen. Um, and uh oh, I sort of lost my train of thought. But actually, I remembered it. The story actually started as just the sort of FAQ section. So throughout, I'm breaking up the narrative with, one of those annoying FAQs like what does this do and how does it help you and how do you start it and all that kind of stuff. I did that because I've worked in marketing and communications for over 20 years and I've written a lot of those kinds of things, and I thought it would be so funny to sort of take that format and talk about something that's really wild and weird. And so the story itself was used to be just those FAQs and those case studies.
Mhm.
And as I, got more into it, I was like, nah, we need a narrative. We need to show what happens here. And it can't be a pretty ending. It's got to be a kind of scary ending because, you know, technology can be scary.
Yeah.
And we're all scared right now from AI. And, this just sort of made sense to me.
Yeah. I was also taken by so you have an epigraph from The Deuce by Candy Renee, which I love. That I can't believe they got rid of that series because I thought it was so good.
So
Um,
good.
but she, as a character, is so similar to the character in the title story. The
Mhm.
sort of the Because she's working in pornography as a woman who was a prostitute and now is making pornographic films. In a lot of ways, I mean, it's the main character in the title story is kind of a pimp. I mean, let's
Mhm.
say.
Yeah.
Um, and so anyway, I don't know. I just wanted to sort of say like that's an interesting sort of parallel there. Um,
Yeah,
I don't
and
know.
I happened to be watching The Deuce while I was writing some of these stories or shortly
Uh-huh.
after. And it was that character of, like you said, the sex worker who then went on to direct these pornography films and try to make them more art than anything. But she came at it from a very practical standpoint of like, I know, we got to get the sex in there, we got to do this, and I know what, people will pay for, and I know that we are just objects to most people. And I know that, and I'm going to play with that, and I might take advantage of that, and we'll just go from there. And I really liked that idea, but also like where that could be taken to, the extremes that could be taken to.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm curious how it feels. First of all, how long did you work on the stories in this collection before they sort of turned into a collection itself, individual stories?
I wrote these stories, I think mostly over 2018 and 2019 actually. And then I sort of set them aside. And it was only in 2022 when I saw the contest that I decided, well, this could make it. I've always liked Friday Black from nonfiction. I've liked collections of short stories like that are speculative in nature. And I
Mhm.
realized I had this collection of sort of wild speculative sci-fi stories, and I was like, this could be something. And so that's why I submitted it then. But it was interesting that, yeah, I had sort of done it at the end of the Trump presidency, and here we are, and they're more powerful than ever in 2024.
Absolutely. I'm curious, did they inform each other? Like, how do I say this? So did you see them as a collection as the stories were coming together? Or was it really just individual story one after another? and then
There
you
was a
realize that
time,
they'll play well together.
yeah, there was a time where I was trying to sort of connect them and link them and bring characters together. And I had
Mm,
sort of a whole sort of tree going of how each one was related to whatever. And then I don't know. I love when that works. I think that's such
yeah.
a cool thing. Like Julia Phillips' Disappearing Earth, such an amazing, she calls it a novel, but it could be a collection of interlinked stories. So many books like that. And to me, that just wasn't working. And so then I just leaned in hard to the individual elements and decided that overall, the genre and the themes are what pulled it together. And I thought that worked well.
Yeah, I'm really glad you didn't sort of try and stretch into that because it's such a unified collection without it. It doesn't need it. Where I think some lean into it so heavily that it without that conceit, they would sort of fall apart.
Yeah. I think I was trying to wedge something in that wasn't wedgeable. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and it works so well without it. So I'm curious how it's been having these out in the world then together as a unit. Have you gotten much feedback? Has it been fun to sort of share it?
Well, what's crazy is, the official release day is tomorrow, but
Yeah.
these have already come out in the world. I've been getting photos from my friends of, oh my gosh, this came in the mail today. And it's been very, very cool. It's surreal. Anytime something you've worked on like this now becomes an object that you wanted it to become an object, but here it is, and it's in your hands, and it's such a wonderful but strange feeling at the same time. I was really surprised and pleased by seeing, got some good reviews in Publishers Weekly and Forward
Mhm.
reviews, and that was very exciting. Just to know that it had reached some people. Um, I like the idea though, no matter what, that, you know, someone who needs to read this hopefully will find it and read it. And that to me is because I know that's what happened to me when I was a kid. I found Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale when I was way too young to read it, but it was everything I wanted it, and it inspired me to write in and of itself. And I needed it at that time. So I'm hoping that it finds its way out there just like that.
I'm picturing a young girl picking this up just like you had Riot Girl and was like, there's something going on out there and I see a glimpse of it, but I can't quite get there and I want to get there and really being inspired by that.
Absolutely. And a lot of it was going over my head at the time, but at the same time, it wasn't like I was, seeing dynamics among men and women in my family and around town and things like that. And it was the budding of some feminism. I'll say that.
Yeah. Can we talk just for a second about the cover too? Because this is such a stunning and powerful cover. Can
Yeah.
you talk some about where that came from? And I won't give away your secret, but maybe
Um,
we could
what's
do a showing.
excuse me. What's so cool is you at the press, you've put together this catalog of images from local artists, from student artists. And when it came time to think about cover, you asked me to look at some of the art that was in there. And I saw this image, and I'm completely forgetting her name, but I will find it.
It's Marie Buckley.
Thank you. And it's called
Mhm.
Morph by Marie Buckley. And I saw this image and I was like, I don't even know if I know what it is, but it's speaking to me. It's evocative of something. I don't know if anyone's seen Francis Bacon paintings where it's of a figure, usually a male figure, and it's sitting down and it's in a portrait, but the face is all sort of scratched out and screaming. And to me, that felt very similar, but it also felt like this might be a woman. This might be a gender non-specific person. I loved that.
Mhm.
Just everything about it. I was like, this is great. So I showed it to you guys and you said, cool, that's weird, but let's go for it. And here it is. It's fantastic.
It's so funny. And now, like, once something comes out like that and it fits so well, it's hard to imagine anything else on there, which is when you've hit something right.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, I did go ahead and tattoo it on my arm. So there we go.
So cool.
Very cool.
And I know that I should mention because Amy has taken over Boa's Instagram for the week. And that was the first share, I believe, was of the tattoo from the book cover. But all week long, you're going to be sharing. What kind of stuff can we expect from the Instagram feed this week?
I'm going to talk about some influences for the book, both books, but also shows and movies, things like that. I'm going to talk about some other projects I work on. and how, other ways of being creative, writing a fiction podcast, doing some music, things like that. So I'm going to talk about a lot of different things, but I'll also include, fan favorites like cats and things like that. It'll be great.
Can you tell us about Broads and Books?
Sure can. Yeah. So my friend Erin and we started a book podcast in 2019. And for 4 years, we read books and we talked about them and we told weird stories and we had a great time every other Sunday. And last year, we decided to expand and we created a production company, Broads and Books Productions. And so now we're producing a number of different podcasts and other shows. We have a podcast out right now called Fuzzy Memories that's all about 80s and 90s pop culture. There's some real, memories that you'll
Mhm.
probably respond to, Peter. And I put out a fiction podcast earlier this year. We have an audio literary magazine coming later this fall. So we have a number of things that are all around the writing and literary and pop culture world.
Oh, that's awesome. So where can people hear that? Where's the best way for them to find it?
If you're looking for Fuzzy Memories, it's at all the players. It's also fuzzymemoriespodcast.com. And then Broads and Books Productions is broadsandbooksproductions.com. And you can find all the links and shows there.
All right. Well, you've been a trooper because I know you woke up feeling ill and your voice was going and everything. And here we've kept you talking and talking for 45 minutes.
Fantastic.
But
No, it's great.
thank you for making the time to do it. Congratulations on the book. I'm so pleased that Bo has published Exile in Guyville. It's a fantastic collection for everyone. And I hope everyone will check it out. Officially released tomorrow.
Yes. Thank you, Peter. Great to talk to you.
Thank you, Amy. Great talking to you. Bye.